Hi, everybody. This is Maggie Barr. I'm the editor of SLV News and Events, a Facebook news site. And this is a web series that we're doing to help folks out who have been affected by the CZU fire. Today, we are going to talk about grief. Losing your home to a fire is devastating, and you'll hardly have time to take a breath and think about the loss before you have to start a full-time job of finding shelter, dealing with insurance, salvaging possessions, establishing routines for your family. I know a lot of you are going through this, or you have friends or loved ones that are going through this. So the stress and fatigue will stay with you all day and all night, impacting your ability to sleep, to understand what your options are when making tough decisions, especially financial decisions. And meanwhile, you still have to navigate the precautions of COVID-19. So in this webinar, we're going to dive into what you and your family might be experiencing, what's considered normal, what's okay, and will these feelings ever stop? And most importantly, what you can do to take better care of yourself and your loved ones while you deal with the trauma that's ongoing as you continue to deal with the results of the fire. Shelly McIntyre is a certified grief specialist who educates people about grief. She coaches individuals through grief therapy and recovery, and researches how grief impacts different industries as well from a business perspective. These days, she's focusing on the impact of grief in the real estate industry and financial planning industry. We also have with us today Wendy Harris, and Wendy Harris works with me as an editor on SLV News and Events, and she'll be monitoring the Q&A. So as you get questions that come to mind, just go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We'll probably hold most of them to the end, the last 15 minutes, so that Shelly can get through all of her all of her content rather. And Shelly and I know each other from a past life when I was in the tech industry. We worked together at a software company in Seattle. So she's a good friend of mine. I trust her implicitly. I talked to her a lot about this content and how we can customize it to help people dealing with this particular crisis. Welcome, Shelly.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me, Maggie. I really appreciate it. So today we're going to go back to the basics and define grief. We'll talk about how it shows up in our bodies. We'll explore the particular emotions that people might experience after a fire loss and what you might be experiencing now. Then we're going to look at our coping strategies for where grief came from and how we were taught to deal with it. Some of those coping strategies are from our childhoods, and a lot of them are not helpful at all. And then I'm going to share some ideas for what to do, because grief requires action. And action as grievers can be small and large, and a lot of them are accessible to you right now. And I'll also talk about what to avoid, because there are a lot of behaviors out there that are really normalized that actually don't help. And if you're a supporter of someone who is going through a fire loss, I will share tips for you as well about how you can be a better support for people in your community. So we'll also have a moment of interactivity. So for this, I'll have you locate your chat button and just find that on your screen, and you'll be ready to type some things in there when I give you the signal. And as Maggie mentioned, there's going to be time for Q&A at the end. Great. So as Maggie said in the intro, a loss from fire is so devastating, and your homes are filled with not just items and heirlooms and memories, but they're filled with your hopes and dreams and expectations for your future. Because of the paperwork demands and what you have going on with insurance and the full-time job of just dealing with the aftermath, you're also losing out on your own time to process what has even happened. For kids, this can translate as a loss of safety and introduce the idea that things are unpredictable in the world that you as parents can't control, and that can be pretty freaky for them. And again, we're still in the midst of a pandemic and social unrest and there's job instability, and these losses stack up. We talk about loss being cumulative, and it's cumulatively negative, which can be very tough to handle. So for those of you who have experienced a home loss, I am truly sorry. I can't even imagine what you're going through, and my heart goes out to all of you. So what is grief? We're going to start with some definitions because there are a few terms that get bandied around and they get confused between each other. So I'll kind of go through each one of them. So trauma is the event itself. Trauma is when you are going through the fire or you are being evacuated or there is a death in your family. Trauma is the event. Grief are the emotions that follow after the event. For some of you, and some that are involved in wildfires and other places, the trauma has passed and you're in the aftermath. But for other people, there might still be a threat of new fires coming. The trauma might be lingering, maybe at a lower intensity level, but it might still be going on. Give yourself some slack if you are still feeling like you are in the midst of trauma. Grief, on the other hand, is the normal reaction to loss of any kind. Grievers are not broken. They don't need to be fixed. If you are in grief, you are normal and you are not broken. And you don't need to be fixed. It's also a collection of conflicting feelings. And when you go through a loss, you might feel anger and confusion and relief at the same time. And all of those conflicting feelings go into grief itself. There are over 40 different types of losses, both tangible, like losing a home or losing a person, or moving away from the people that you know, and also intangible losses really matter too. Loss of safety, loss of trust, loss of confidence in our institutions that can stand up and are supposed to protect us. So grief is different from depression. Grief is usually attributable to a specific loss or a set of losses, and grief can decrease with action over time, and it really does need action, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. There are no stages of grief. There's a big myth out there from the stages of dying from a long-term illness that got mixed up with grief, but there are no stages. It comes in waves. Grief can be attached to specific moments in time or milestones or birthdays or objects that can trigger new waves of grief. Depression, on the other hand, is more persistent and pervasive. It's a clinical diagnosis and it's often treated with drugs. And depression might not be associated with a specific set of losses. So we're talking about grief today. If you feel like you might be suffering from depression, I will share some resources at the end, and Maggie will have a PDF to share as well that includes those resources. So what does grief look like? Where does it live? Well, it lives in our brains and it lives in our bodies. And experiencing grief for a lot of people feels like an emotional concussion. And if you know anybody that's ever suffered from a concussion, you know that the reactions can be really unique to the individual. And you might experience a lower ability to concentrate, hold a train of thought, hold a conversation. You might experience unpredictable emotions that come up seemingly out of nowhere, like anger and sadness and hopelessness. You might have disrupted sleep patterns or be triggered by lights and sounds and smells. You might have headaches or chest pains, and a lot of these things could happen all at once, one at a time, and come up when you don't expect them. It's just annoying and it's unpredictable when you're going through grief. And for people who are dealing with the aftermath of the loss from fire, there are some other particular things that you or the people that you love might also be going through. You might be disoriented if you're waking up in a new place and you have to remember all over again what happened. That is very disconcerting. You might feel baffled that life is just going on as normal for the people around you or friends and family far away who are talking about seemingly trivial things when your life has turned upside down and you're dealing with some really, really hard stuff. That can be very annoying too. If you are a survivor of the fire and your home ended up unscathed, you might feel some survivor's guilt that your home was spared and somebody else's was very badly damaged. I do want to say one thing about the word guilt. Not a helpful word. Guilt implies a previous intent to harm. So you might regret or wish that the situation and the circumstances had been different, but it's very unlikely that you intended to harm your neighbor. So we don't use the word guilt in the grief recovery that I practice. We talk about wishing it had been different, better, or more. So let's just try to toss guilt out the window. It does not serve us at all. You might feel abandoned by the institutions or governments or technology that was supposed to come to your aid in a timely fashion. That's super tough. People found out about the fires in a variety of ways, from the radio to Facebook to friends across the country who were phoning them. It's kind of crazy how the word got out about the fires in your area. You might feel embarrassed that you felt like you didn't plan ahead enough or get enough insurance or pack a go bag. That can impact grief as well. Anger at insurance companies, at friends and family who you thought were going to show up and they are absent. And the sadness about these losses over time can slowly turn into nostalgia or even annoyance when you go looking for the spatula and you have to remember that your favorite spatula is gone. Again, all of these feelings and reactions are normal, and you are normal. So, where did our coping strategies come from? When we are kids, some of the first losses that we experience are pets, moving, and the loss of grandparents. So when we're really little, our parents or caregivers teach us how to deal with that loss. They say, don't cry, we'll get a new dog. Or they say, if you're going to cry, you should go to your room. These are myths. They don't help us, and we carry them into our adulthoods. And Maggie, if you wouldn't mind sharing that first slide about myths, then we can have that up in front of us. Okay, so these are the general myths about grief that we carry with us. Don't feel bad. It's usually kind of an umbrella that gets applied to a whole bunch of things. Replacing the loss is you'll find a new boyfriend, or we'll get another dog, or don't worry, I'll get you a new bike. It's a way of dampening what you're feeling and masking it, and replacing it with something that's probably not going to help. Grieving alone, as we mentioned, is a big one. That serves mainly to isolate us as grievers, which is actually one of the worst things that can be done. You know, we hear a lot of people say, just leave her alone. She's having a really hard time, give her some space. But that's actually isolating the other person, and they're left with no outlet. Be strong for other people. You have to keep a stiff upper lip and be strong. That pushes grief down. And keeping busy, that's my favorite. I am very good at that one. Pushing the whole idea of even feeling anything aside and just getting stuff done. I certainly learned that when I was a kid. You might have too. And people will tell you that time heals. Nope. Time does not heal. Action heals, but time, it doesn't really make a difference to grief. So Maggie, if you could go to the next slide. So once you recognize these myths, you'll hear them repeated from other people. And there are going to be a lot of very well-meaning people who say very clueless things to you, and those things do not help. Some of them are even a little laughable. So I've put some of these up on the screen right now, like, at least you still have a job. Oh, your house was severely damaged, but your next house, oh, it's going to be so much better. Or if somebody died from either the fire loss or from COVID, everybody dies, or God doesn't give you more than you can handle. These things can be just so infuriating to grievers, and they are not helpful things. So here's our moment of interactivity. If you are there and you want to participate, we like sharing some of the laughable and awful things that people have said to us. So if there are things that people have said to you after a loss, whether it's from the fire or any other loss in your life, go ahead and tap it into the chat. And if we get some good ones, I'll read those aloud a little bit later in the talk. People say some pretty crazy stuff. But when they say that stuff, they're really just reflecting their own upbringing and the myths that they grew up with. So you might also reflect on some of the myths that you grew up with that might not be serving you today. So you can stop that share for now, Maggie. Thank you. So then we talk about energy releasing behaviors. So this grief builds up and it kind of is like roiling around in this kettle that doesn't have anywhere to release its steam. So it's a buildup of emotional energy, and it's gotta go somewhere. If we let that energy out, it would be a lot better. We have to do something to release the energy. A lot of people just turn to food and alcohol. This is a very common energy releasing behavior, going to comfort food. And we talk about comfort food like it's a really great thing. I just want some mashed potatoes and that's going to make me feel better, or ice cream or chocolate or a glass of wine. Super common, socially acceptable. And Maggie, if you want to pop up that next slide, that would be great. There's a whole bunch of these energy releasing behaviors that we engage in that helps us to push aside the grief and allows us to not think about them for a while. So in the short term, they work. And this is one of the problems about energy releasing behaviors like shopping or drugs or picking at your skin or watching porn. Like, they work. So you think they're helping, but they're really short term. What they're doing is they're adding to grief and delaying the time that you can actually confront what's going on. Over time, you also need more of these, and you need them more often. And I'm not saying that these are all bad things, but what matters is about how and when and under what context you're using them. So you might also consider what your short-term energy releasing behaviors are and whether you're turning to them in a healthy way or whether they're masking some feelings that you're just not ready to look at yet. And if that's true, that's okay. I think developing an awareness around what our behaviors are is a really good first step. Okay, so Maggie, you can stop that share for a moment. So a few things to know about grief and the feelings that are surrounding grief. First, feelings are not permanent. And even though you might feel that you are roiled in chaos right now, you will not always feel this way. You are resilient. All people are so resilient, and you will get through this. You are also worthy of help and from other people. And receiving help does not make you weak or culpable at all. You're also worthy and deserving of self-care. Taking care of yourself will give you more energy to take care of the things that you've got to do in your life and the other people around you. And you might still be experiencing trauma right now and you're not ready to deal with your grief. That is okay. Your grief will wait for you as long as it takes. It will always be there ready for you to confront. And again, people are going to say some pretty clueless and well-meaning things to you. Try not to take them personally. So again, they are reflecting what they grew up with and they're bringing myths into their adulthood. You can understand that those are myths now that you know what the myths are and spot them. So let's just take a look in chat to see if we got a couple. Oh, that's great. You're subconsciously just now allowing the rental the rental you're in now to be a home. Oh, you're now, oh yeah, I got it. You're subconsciously just now allowing the rental you're in to be a home. Yeah, it's funny. I've heard a lot of people who get a diagnosis of cancer and they try to process that grief and other people say, well, you know, you willed it into your body through negative thinking. Whew, there's some doozies out there for sure. All right, so now that we know some of the ins and outs of grief, where the myths came from, how these short-term energy relieving behaviors can harm us and delay the processing of grief, what do we do about it? Like, if we can take action, what action should we actually take? So, Maggie, could you pop up that next slide? Thank you. First of all, allow yourself to feel your feelings and practice naming those feelings. I think getting really specific about what each of the feelings are can be really helpful. So we're so accustomed to just saying, I'm feeling lousy, I'm feeling bad, I'm feeling overwhelmed. But if you can get really specific about what those feelings are, you can help identify what's going on inside your body. Talk about your experience. Encourage kids to talk about it too. A lot of kids every kid models their parents. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and sad and you go into your room and close the door because you don't want to expose that to your kids, they're going to model that behavior. They'll take cues from you. So this is an opportunity to help them talk about their feelings too and model that. Straight men can have a harder time with this. There is traditionally a division between how men process their feelings and how many women process their feelings. So if there are men in your life who have a hard time even just locating that feeling in their bodies, you can be super patient and help them identify those feelings and talk about them too. Let other people help you. This can be really challenging for people because they feel like asking for help or receiving help is a sign of weakness, that they don't deserve it, that they did something wrong. People really want to help. And frankly, you might need it. So try to receive that help because people will step up and they'll be happy to. Stay connected to friends and family. Isolation is really brutal when people are grieving. And ideally, you'll find people who are good listeners, who won't judge you or placate you or try to fix you. And it might be people in your community that surprise you. It might not be the people that you expected to have show up. It could be a different set of people, but we need good, supportive people around us, especially when we're going through trauma and grief. Get rest and take care of yourself. Again, you're going to need that energy, and giving yourself 5 minutes of meditation or going out for a coffee with a friend, even small moments can really, really help re-energize us. Notice your own energy releasing behaviors, even if you're not ready to give them up. Start becoming a little bit more aware of when you're tuning into them or when you're turning to them for comfort. I'm not saying that you have to abandon all of them, definitely not. But if you bring in some awareness and go, oh, I'm having a second glass of wine because I feel like I'm so overwhelmed, just pay attention to that and consider whether you can talk about the feelings instead. And when you are feeling overwhelmed, there's a breathing technique that I like doing that can actually slow down our heart rates and get more oxygen flowing through our bodies. And that's called the 2-to-1 breathing technique. And it goes like this. It's very easy. You can do it anywhere you are, where you're inhaling for a count of however many seconds. Let's say it's 3, 4, or 5 seconds. And you inhale through your nose for a 3 count. Let's just try it right now. 1, 2, 3, inhaling, and then double the time exhaling back through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you can increase those number of seconds, it's really going to help center you and calm you down. You can put your hand on your heart area if you want to do that. If you're feeling really anxious and overwhelmed, it's a really nice tool to just go to wherever you are. It doesn't take that much time, and it can really help slow things down. So this slow breathing technique can really help too. And then when you're ready, allow yourself to mourn the losses. And it's so easy to focus on the fact that you just all got out safely that sometimes people feel like, well, it's so silly to even talk about the photo album, or it's so silly to even talk about that cutting board that my mom gave me. But it isn't. These things really matter. So let yourself talk about them when you're ready, and talk about them with your friends and family. It's good to get it out. It's not just a house. This is a collection of memories. It's an era of your life. So what to avoid? If you can go to the next slide, Maggie. So again, we talked about these short-term energy relieving behaviors. Drugs and alcohol, they're numbing agents that can delay healing. Being in constant motion and expecting yourself to be 100% productive all the time. That is really, really tough while you're in grief. You have an emotional concussion, and you wouldn't expect somebody who had like a football concussion to be just up and at 'em. So I would try not to expect that of yourselves. Be very gentle with yourselves. Comparing losses is really tough. We are so wired to say, well, what I went through isn't all that bad because what my neighbor went through is terrible. We actually all experience our losses at 100% for us. Our losses are unique to us. Our grief is unique to us. And it's just not helpful to compare our losses with other people. Don't isolate or grieve alone if that's an option. Get people around you, talk to people, stay in contact. Even if it means like writing a little list saying, I'm going to talk to one person a day, or I'm going to have one coffee with some friend each week. It really helps keep us grounded and can help us prevent from kind of swirling down into the abyss. Don't tell people you're fine if you're not fine. People can handle it. If you say, you know what, I'm doing kind of crappy today and I'm a little overwhelmed, but thank you for asking. You don't have to protect their feelings. People are adults. They can handle their own feelings. You can be honest, and they might actually have something helpful to say to you. And it's also so tempting to tell people that we're going to get back to normal soon. You might not. It might be a new kind of normal, but you can create that new kind of normal together. Okay, we can stop sharing for a moment. So there's a simple ritual that some people use after losing their homes to fire or moving away from a home to a different place. And that's called saying goodbye to the home. And it can sound really silly to some people, but it really does work. And it helps us bring a sense of completion to a space and allow us to usher in a new era for our lives. Here's how it works. You gather your family together, or the people that you were living with. And if it's safe to do so, you go either into the room, a room of the home, or where the room was in the home. And you talk together about memories and things that happened in that room. So if it was the kitchen, this is where we burnt the Thanksgiving turkey that one year, or this is where I dropped a casserole dish, or if it's a bedroom, this is where we had that crazy birthday party, impromptu in the middle of the morning. Talk about those memories as a family, or bring a friend if you were living by yourself, and thank the room. Thank you, kitchen. Goodbye, kitchen. I know it sounds so silly, but it really does help to acknowledge that something happened there that was really important to you and to the family, and that you appreciate it, and that you can move on and you can find some sense of completion. Do that even in the bathrooms. And once you do that, it can help you acknowledge the meaning of the home. We don't talk about closure in the grief recovery that I do, even when it comes to like homes or people, because you never really end a relationship with anybody, even if they have died. But you can find a sense of completion to move on to a next stage. So the say goodbye to the home ritual is something that can help if you have to leave your home permanently. Okay, supporters. I'm hoping that there are some supporters on this webinar today who really want to show up for other people. And maybe you are working at a nonprofit, or you're a real estate agent, or you're an insurance adjuster, but you know people in your community who have gone through this fire loss and you're not so sure what to say. I've got some tips for you. So Maggie, if you wouldn't mind sharing that next slide. So the first thing is to really cultivate a sense of empathy and patience. People are not going to be fully functioning. Grief, again, affects the mind and the body. So have patience, be empathetic. And we talk about listening as a heart with ears. And when you are a heart with ears, you shut your mouth and you open your heart. And you allow and encourage other people to speak, and you don't interrupt them, because people who are grieving want to be heard. They don't want to be judged, and they don't want to be fixed, because they're not broken. Avoid repeating myths to people. And it might require you to think about the types of myths that you grew up with as well. And just remember that they won't help anybody feel better. And it's honestly better to say, I can't imagine what you're going through, rather than at least you had 2 rooms that survived. I mean, it's craziness. But you can identify those myths for yourself as well, which could be helpful. Avoid saying, I know how you feel. Even if you went through your own loss, even if you had part of your own home destroyed, you don't know how anybody feels. None of us really do. And because all of our grief is unique and we experience it at 100%, we don't really know. We can't be in somebody else's shoes. Ask specific questions. Sometimes if somebody is really deep in this emotional concussion, it can be really hard to process a question like, how are you doing? It's too open-ended, it's too vague. But if you say, how is it going with the insurance claim this week? Or how are you doing with replacing your kitchen stuff today? That's a more specific question that people will have better access to. Remember that when grievers in your life are lashing out or having trouble concentrating or missing appointments with you, it's a symptom of their very normal grief, and try not to take it personally. And this can be a long process for people who have lost homes to fires. And if you're feeling like, oh my God, this happened a couple of months ago and I haven't said anything, it's never too late to show up for somebody. You don't have to be embarrassed about it. People will accept the well wishes and your help whenever you're ready to give it. and offer your service and your help if possible. This could be like debris removal or cleaning or picking up groceries or helping babysit kids if you have that type of relationship with somebody who's been through this type of loss. But ask what the family needs. Showing up with random boxes of stuff, it could potentially place an additional burden on that family. And follow their lead. People who are going through grief, they need to be in charge and they know what they need. And in a very frantic situation where they might have felt quite out of control, it's good for them to just regain some kind of sense of control. So those are some tips that will also appear on a PDF that Maggie can share later. Okay, Maggie, you can stop that sharing for a moment. So in conclusion, to wrap it up, here's what we talked about. First, grief is normal. It's the normal reaction to loss. If you are feeling it, you are normal. You're not broken. And you don't need to be fixed. Feelings might seem permanent, but they are not. You will not always feel this way. And grief can live in our bodies as well as our minds. And it shows up in a whole bunch of different ways, including loss of concentration. It's kind of like an emotional concussion. We all grew up with these crazy myths, these very incorrect myths. And then a lot of us use them to try to support other people. So bringing some awareness to the myths that we grew up with will help us stop using them with other people, and also to have some perspective when somebody uses them on us, where you can go, oh, that's a myth that you grew up with. It's not helping me. I'm going to let that one go. You can take specific actions to help you heal and get better from grief. And if you're a supporter, you can help by listening empathetically, being a big heart with ears, and offering help and letting the griever take the lead. So we're going to share some of these resources on a PDF with you later. And Maggie and Wendy, I think we have some time for questions, if there are questions.
I have a question. I have a friend who's lost his house, and he's underinsured and unhappy and depressed. And I want to say something that's hopeful. It's like I wish I could say something that's hopeful. Like I feel like he needs to hear some good news, but I don't really know what to say. Is there anything that we can do along those lines?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the person. And for some people, saying, I can't imagine what I'm going through, is there anything that I can do to help you, is great. And for other people, showing up with a cup of coffee can be even more impactful. So, I think back to what everybody's love languages are. And for some people, words of encouragement are their love language and they respond to it. And for other people, just acts of service, where if you share a set of resources with your friend, or find, free counseling that he could go to, or show up and say, hey, I'm going to take you out for a cup of coffee and we're just going to talk, or sending him a pizza. Like there are actions that can take that sometimes speak louder than words, especially if somebody is really spiraling. They need to actually get out of their words and turn to action.
Yeah, okay. I like the pizza idea. I think that's a good way to, because with COVID, it's so hard because you being physically present is not always the right way to go with COVID. So it's tough.
That's right.
Yeah. I don't know if you have any other questions. Do you see anything, Wendy? Nope. Okay.
Nothing in the Q&A or chat. Anybody got any more questions? Oh, here we go. Somebody's. How should someone respond when a well-intentioned friend says, it's just stuff, at least you're safe? Another challenge for us are family members who are upset by our loss. They want us to provide exhaustive amounts of emotional support to them.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And a lot of us are pretty conflict averse too, which makes things even more challenging. Yes, well-intentioned people who say it's just stuff, at least you're safe. I don't know. I think I would say back to that. Thank you. I'll talk to you later. And I don't know that I would necessarily take it as a moment to teach them, but you can say that that's not actually super helpful because the stuff was really important to me. And there were some really irreplaceable things there that we can't get back. And a lot of times that can shut that down. And then friends and family, yeah, it's funny how other friends, because they can't process information like this, will ask you to process it for them, which doubles the emotional burden on you. And in a sense, you can say that. You can say, hey, I don't have the energy to focus on helping you through my grief. I've got to focus on what we're going through and making sure my family is okay. So unless you want to send me a box of kitchen supplies, a gift card to Target, then we'll talk another time.
Well, maybe that's the way to handle it is say, you know what you could really do to help, because maybe when they're helping, then that helps them with their grief. Like they feel like because I think that's the hardest thing about watching someone suffer that's close, whatever the loss is it feeling crippled about not being able to do anything. So maybe give them things to do. And
that's right. That's exactly right. People need jobs. And if you might actually keep an ongoing list, whether it's on your phone or a piece of paper that you have, where you keep a list of the needs that you've got. And if people call and say, oh my God, how are you? You want to talk about it for an hour? You can say, actually, no, I need this thing from my list. That lets them go, oh my God, I can be useful, because they just want to be useful and feel helpful to you.
yeah, so.
The whole emotional processing doesn't actually help either of you.
I mean, I've heard too that sometimes if you're grieving, it helps to help other people.
Yeah.
But is that inappropriate to suggest that to someone? Because it's not, maybe it doesn't work for them and it's kind of tacky to say, well, you need to go help more people.
Yeah, it's really got to be the call of the person in grief. They need to be the one leading the charge there and expressing their needs rather than having help foisted on them. I don't know if any of you remember the old Free to Be You and Me. I know I'm dating myself here, but there's
my mom played it for me regularly as a child on a record.
Great. Yes, I wore mine out. And there's a line in it that says, sometimes help is the kind of help we all could do without. And we don't need help foisted on us. We need to be the ones in control of how we are helped.
Right.
We can ask.
Nice. Okay. Well, I can share that PDF if you'd like, just so you can see what it looks like. Let me do that real quick here. So it's just grief is normal, especially after losing your home, practices to move forward, what to avoid, saying goodbye to the house, supporting friends, and then resources, Santa Cruz County Fire Resources, Red Cross Recovering After the Fire, Shine a Light Counseling Center, and in Santa Cruz, a search for Santa Cruz therapists, a video on breathing techniques, and an article about supporting friends.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully we can make this downloadable for anybody to go get.
Yeah, I'll post it as a downloadable link on the event page at Facebook.
Great.
Yeah. All right. And then we have your contact slide too. Let me share that as well.
Thank you.
There you go.
Great. Thank you so much, Maggie, and thanks to the viewers. And I hope you learned something about grief and how you are normal and grief is normal. You don't need to be fixed because you're not broken.
That's right. All right.
Thank you for doing this today, Shelly.
You bet.
Thank you, Shelly. We'll see you later.
Of course. Thank you. Goodbye.
All right.